1,500 rongens. After a day of work, our hands would ache, and we could not make a fist.
The first time I went up on the roof, the whole thing was covered in radioactive waste. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what world I was in, and I started snapping photos. If you look close, you can see traces of radiation on the film. I was holding the camera like this, and it was coming up from the ground, like that.
Your eyes hurt, and there was a metal taste in your mouth. Those are the two things you felt. And once you felt that, you knew you had gotten more than your dose.
You went like this, but you couldn't hear anything. Everything was covered in lead. Even today, 20 years later, I can still taste the lead in my mouth.
Thousands of them will discover that this peculiar taste means an invisible enemy is attacking. As the biorobots are sacrificing their lives on the roof of the plant, the cleanup continues throughout the 19-mile zone, 24 hours a day, rain or shine.
Where normally it would take one man 1 hour to do a job, here in Chernobyl it took 60 people.
When we came down off the roof, it felt like our blood had been sucked dry by vampires. We were drained. We could not move. Some people would have nosebleeds. The firemen were right there. If someone's nose started bleeding, they got sent to the hospital. If we collapsed, we got sent home. But we wanted to hold out. But at that time, we were young and strong. Our health is shot. We've lost everything. When they sent all those people up onto the roof, no one knew exactly the actual level of radiation. Now we know it was between 10,000 and 12,000 rongens per hour. At that level of radioactivity, people never should have been sent.
7 months after the explosion, the zone has been cleaned up and the sarcophagus completed. 500,000 people, military and civilian, have participated in the operation.
Our sarcophagus is a pantheon, a tomb, a mausoleum. Our second mausoleum. After that, we stopped building nuclear power plants.
A bitter victory from which the country will never recover. The first snow has started to stick on Chernobyl. For authorities, this proves the sarcophagus is airtight, at least for 30 years, or so they predict. The liquidators have gone home. Reactors 1, 2, and 3 are back up and running. The first battle of Chernobyl has ended in a victory that heralded the end of the USSR. But for many, it also marks the beginning of a war that 20 years later still hasn't ended. For the hundreds of thousands of atomic refugees, as for the hundreds of thousands of veterans from the Battle of Chernobyl, the fight against their invisible enemy hasn't let up. Everyone who went to Chernobyl is still suffering from the radioactivity their bodies absorbed. In the months following the accident, the liquidators flooded into hospitals all over the Soviet Union. 20 years later, those who are still alive continue to frequent Hospital Number 6. They're all victims of what specialists have since named the Chernobyl syndrome.
We've all got a bunch of symptoms: heart, stomach, liver, kidneys, nervous system. Our whole bodies were radically upset by the metabolic changes caused by radiation and chemical exposure.
These men weren't even 30 when they were sent in to battle the atom. Today, the survivors are not yet 50 years old, but they struggle like senior citizens. According to the military, of the 500,000 Chernobyl liquidators, 20,000 have already died. 200,000 are officially disabled.
Во-первых, по здоровью, не знаешь потом, сколько проживешь, и от чего ты умрешь.
You don't know what effects it will have on your children, if you have any.
Если дети зарождаешь...
We know all that. And we know the invisible enemy is eating away inside of us like a worm.
Как окажется. Понимающий это понимает.
For us, the war continues. And little by little, we're slipping away from this world.
Врагом продолжается. И они потихонечку отходят.
Yet for 2 decades, only 59 deaths have been officially attributed to the Chernobyl disaster. Not a single study has been carried out of the 130,000 refugees from the zone. Not a single statistic on the state of the 500,000 liquidators. No figures on the population that continues to live around Chernobyl and in the contaminated areas. The real amount of radiation these people were exposed to has never been revealed to them. The United Nations recently reported an increase in rare childhood thyroid cancer cases, but it found no evidence of higher birth defect rates that could be tied to the accident. Some charities and environmental groups disagree, citing local data that showed much higher rates for various deformities and developmental abnormalities in newborns. Since 2001, the 3 Chernobyl reactors have been shut down once and for all. But 20 years after the explosion, a dosimeter flies off the chart at the base of the sarcophagus. High levels of radioactivity 100 times above normal are still contaminating the plant's surroundings. The structure has been weakened by rain and erosion. Since its construction, 3,000 liquidators have been watching over it, trying to ward off damage.
We built the sarcophagus to last 30 years, thinking that 30 years after the explosion, we could build a new sarcophagus without people having to run because of high radiation levels. 20 years have gone by, and nothing's been done yet, and it's urgent that it gets replaced. But the Ukraine doesn't have any more money. Neither do we.
A new sarcophagus is underway, but its construction is already 10 years behind schedule. It is a structure 350 feet tall, meant entirely to cover the first sarcophagus. It will cost $1 billion. An international fund, led by Hans Blix, has been set up.
We still have not put the new sarcophagus on it. It will be ready in a couple of years' time. When that is done, well, then they can, in due course, later on, remove the masses of spent fuel or of melted fuel which is there.
20 years after the explosion, the cooled magma at the reactor's core, nearly 50 feet underground, is still a terrible
Never be life again.
Despite this terrible warning, interest in nuclear power appears to be increasing once again. In the US, more than a dozen utility companies hope to build new nuclear plants to meet increasing energy demands and to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, which cause global warming. Nuclear energy may ultimately help reduce global warming, but this lifeless landscape will serve as an eternal reminder of the potential risk involved and the enormous sacrifice 500,000 Soviet men and women made in the Battle of Chernobyl.